There's a saying that goes around a lot among computer programmers. It's, "So long and thanks for all the fish." Actually, that's the title of the fourth part of the 5-part trilogy by Douglas Adams. Nor is it the phrase I'm actually wanting to talk about here. The phrase I actually want to talk about is, "Don't reinvent the wheel." In computer programming, this is often brought up when somebody writes a function from scratch to solve an issue that there's already a function for, particularly when it's unnecessary to do so. For example, most modern computer languages already have a lot of different functions pre-written, such as sorting algorithms, that only need a tiny bit of extra code when you want to sort something that isn't one of the language's native data types. Speaking from experience, I've written a few programs that sort characters based on their initiative score. I created a new data type that was the name and an initiative score. While I could have written a completely new algorithm for sorting the characters, it was easier for me to simply use somebody else's sorting algorithm and work around that. In the latter case, I only needed to write a small piece of code that produced either a 1 or a -1 based on certain criteria. And it gave me the results I needed, without having to do a bunch of extra work, like figuring out how to write a sorting algorithm. The way this relates to RPGs is this. Instead of trying to house rule a game to hell and back to make it do a certain thing the game probably wasn't designed for, just find a game that's more apt for what you're hoping to accomplish. If you're wanting to run a modern horror game that doesn't rely on dungeon crawling, coming up with house rules for a modern setting and supernatural creatures as a player character to use in Dungeons & Dragons may not necessarily be the best option. At least when you consider that dungeon crawling is mostly what D&D is designed for. I mean, it's in the blasted name of the game. Dungeons and Dragons, not galas and goblins. If you have to overhaul the rules to your game to make it run what you want, you'll be better off if you just switch to something else. That way, the players can refer to their own copy of the rulebook, and don't have to rely on you remembering how you came up with all the new and changed rules. This, of course, means you'll need to learn a new game for yourself, but I promise it isn't that hard. In fact, you'll probably remember that I've talked about how to learn the rules for a new game before. But one way or another, you're going to be teaching the players new rules, and it's better to go with something everybody can feasibly read up on in their free time. Another angle to consider is this. Sometimes what you're trying to house rule has already been included in a splat book somewhere, or even the core book. This is yet another thing where I speak from experience. One of my favorite games is Ryutama, a comfy version of a typical fantasy game, where instead of warriors and wizards risking life and limb to get treasure, you instead have merchants and minstrels going from town to town just to see the world. Ryutama is fairly rules-light, but retains the identity of being mostly about travel, since the terrain is what's most likely to harm your character, and a good campsite is what's most likely to rejuvenate them. Out of curiosity, I wanted to see if I could bring that same sort of feeling to Dungeons & Dragons, where surviving the journey to the destination is just as important as the destination itself. I began reverse engineering how long the average person could travel in an hour, and scaled map hexes to be 1 hour of movement per hex, and began researching how much food the average person needs per day. Days into my research, I finally opened the player's handbook to see how the survival skill is used, and learned that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition already had rules for this sort of gameplay. And it was nearly identical to the rules I devised from my research. And that's how I wasted 3 days of my life, reinventing the wheel.